So I said we were at the end of part 3, and now we're at the end of the entire module. So congratulations, you made it this far. So we've talked in this module about what? If you're saying objectives, modeling, and practice, good for you. That's exactly what we've been talking about. So let's close this out by talking about this in the context of the DBI framework. So why do we put explicit instruction in the DBI framework? I have a set of questions here for you. And before I tell you what I think, I'd like you to think about, in terms of your DBI framework, why would you decide that an adaptation should be to increase the explicitness of your instruction? There's a series of other questions here to ask yourself as well. And I want you to do it with a partner. You can do it online with a partner, on a discussion board. You can do it live with a partner, and so on. So talk with a partner, however you can do that. And then we'll come back, and I'll tell you my thoughts about this. So enjoy a nice conversation, live or online, or however you're going to do it. And then I'll tell you my thoughts. Enjoy. So how would we answer these questions? How would we determine if we need to increase the explicitness of instruction? Well, it's going to show up in what kind of information about the student. We're going to see it in the progress monitoring data. We're going to see that the student is making inadequate progress. There are a lot of reasons for that. So how do we know it's explicit instruction that's the need? Well, one important way to look at that would be to look at the diagnostic data and see if the student has some fundamental misunderstandings about the content. If the student is just not getting it, it probably means that the explicitness is not adequate, because if it were, they would be giving you mostly correct responses. Probably the practice is too difficult. Probably they didn't get the skill to begin with, and it needs to be broken into more steps, or the knowledge needs to be broken into smaller pieces. And so we should see in the diagnostic data, that is to say, even teacher-made tests, observations by you and others, we should be able to see in all of those things that that's where students are struggling, that they're not understanding the key concepts. So we need to increase the explicitness of our instruction. Why do we increase explicitness even when we have a program? We asked that question at the beginning. You should have some ideas now. Obviously, you talked about it with a partner, so I hope that you did. The idea here is that programs are not always going to include explicit instruction practices. Sometimes they don't give them to you in the program. Some programs are very good about providing guidance to help you be explicit. But as you saw throughout this module, we looked at many program examples where that was not the case. So in many cases, we don't have enough description of the explicitness in the program. Second, as you saw in many of the examples also, there isn't enough explicitness to begin with. So some programs aren't actually providing explicit instruction. They're providing a list of activities that don't lead to mastery of a specific objective. Now, how do you determine what aspect of your practice needs to change most? So you have all these aspects of explicit instruction in the model that we've shown you. We've got the modeling practice, supporting practices. And you don't know about supporting practices yet. But in terms of the modeling practice, how do you know whether it's the modeling, whether it's your explanation, whether it's your examples, whether it's the way you do guided practice or independent practice? How do you know which of those you need to change most? What resource do you have for that? The answer? The checklist. The checklists are designed to help you think about the parts of your instruction that you do better and that you need to improve. And what's great about the checklist is it's not evaluative. It's just, did you do it? Did you not? And if you haven't implemented that part of the checklist, then that's what you need to work on. So how do you decide? You look at the checklist and decide, what am I best at? What do I need to work on? How do you evaluate the quality of the changes you made? How well they are actually going? Well, first, the simple thing to do is to see whether or not you actually just did what it says on the checklist. If you did, you're on the right track. So the quality is improving if you're just following the guidance from the checklist. Hopefully also you're working with a coach and some peers, and you're looking at videos of your own teaching. And that's going to show you very clearly whether or not you're actually doing those things. Just thinking about it after a lesson might help, and we're going to ask you to do that. It's going to really help you better if you can look at a video of yourself teaching and then reflect on that. But if you can't, look at it, think about your teaching on your own, but better, talk with it about somebody else. And we'll ask you to do that in the final activity. And how would you evaluate the quality? And finally, how would you figure out the changes help students? You're going to see it where? You're going to see it in two places. You're going to see it in progress monitoring data, and you're going to see it in the formative assessments, which are daily assessments that often, if the students aren't responding, we would use as diagnostic assessment. But if we're seeing those daily assessments improve, and we're seeing students make better progress on progress monitoring, and that's the primary goal, then we know that we're doing the right thing. We're on the right track. The explicit instruction boosted things for the student. So we can see now the important link between database individualization and explicit instruction. Finally, let's talk about those checklists. Rather than talk about them in detail, you have a list of all these checklists in the workbook for you to review. And as I said on the last slide, what's really critical here is that you evaluate your practice in terms of every one of these things to see whether or not these are things you do. And if you do, give yourself a check. If not, these are things you need to work on. And it begins with a good objective. One critical thing I find in a lot of instruction is instruction isn't objective driven. And so you need to use these guides to figure out whether or not you're delivering explicit instruction that has a clear objective. We also talked about the importance of modeling, and we've given some examples of how to give clear explanations and how to model multiple plane examples. And you should, at this point, have an understanding of what makes for clear explanation and what makes for a good set of planned examples. And of course, throughout that process, you're going to use the supporting practices. Again, the description of how those work is in the next module. So you can focus on things at the top for yourself at this point. Later, we'll talk about how to incorporate these. And finally, practice. Throughout the practice component, you need to think about which type of practice you need. Sometimes it's guided, sometimes independent, sometimes it's both. And sometimes the length of one is short and the length of the other is long, and so on. And you've learned about how to make good decisions about how to decide if it's guided or independent or both that you need. So if you follow this checklist to help you make decisions about how to guide and how to provide guided and independent practice, students hopefully will improve. And it's all about you looking at the checklist and deciding for yourself, do I do these things? And if yes, great. If not, this is a place to improve. So how are we going to help you sort of take all the things you've learned in Module 5 and put them together? Well, there are two things, totally linked. There's a journal entry and an application activity. The journal entry is about actually thinking about the instruction, planning the instruction. So you're going to think about a lesson that you are about to teach, whether you're a student teacher or your teacher's been teaching for several years, many years. You are going to think about a lesson you're going to do soon. And then you're going to create a plan for that lesson. And the real reason we're going to have you do a plan is we want to make sure that you're thoughtful about meeting all the requirements on what? You're saying checklist in your head? Exactly. And it's going to start with that good objective. And so from the beginning, your lesson will go all the better if you come up with a very clear objective about what it is you expect students to do by the end of the lesson. At that point, the modeling and practice will flow well. You may make the decision that you need to do a lot of guided practice and not very much independent practice, or you might dispense with one or the other altogether. And that's okay. You could even actually take this and do multiple cycles of it. As we said before, you don't always just have to do it once. You can do it multiple times. Then you're going to teach the lesson. And that's over here. You're going to implement the lesson that you're going to reflect on. And then after, if you have a coach, and hopefully you do, or a partner, or someone, or instructor, someone to help you think about your lesson, the goal is to reflect on this and look at the checklist and see whether or not you are using the methods we've talked about for your deciding your objective, for implementing your modeling, and implementing your practice. And finally, when you're done with the lesson, important to reflect on your own practice. And by looking at your own practice and coming up with points about how well you did these things, thinking for yourself about those, looking at the checklist, comparing your instruction, that is going to help you do all the better. And as I said before, what's really helpful is if you can video record your instruction in order to look at that later. That is a very powerful tool for helping you understand your practice, because sometimes you'll find there are things that happened you didn't even know. Good things and not so good things. So that's the assignment to culminate this entire module. Look at your modeling, look at your practice, decide how good are these things for you. And if you can do these well, I feel I can say I can guarantee your instruction will improve. That sounds a little used car salesman-y, so maybe I shouldn't say that. I'm going to guarantee it. But I hope that by using these techniques and looking carefully at your practice, thinking about the videos you've watched, I hope that you can use this information to improve your practice, to improve the modeling, and to improve the practice you deliver for students. And with that, I'll say goodbye. And good luck with modeling and practice. And finally, enjoy the next module that will talk about how to execute those supporting practices that are critical for modeling and for practice. So thanks.